Let's move on to the Scrum process. This process is simple, and it's meant to overlay any other existing work approaches, including other processes. Roughly speaking, Scrum takes any work that you're doing towards a goal and divides it into little micro projects called sprints. So when we look at this, we see that a sprint is a period of time. Sprints follow one after another, but each one is an independent piece of work whose purpose is to deliver an increment of potentially releasable functionality in your product that adheres to the Scrum team's current definition of done. Now, the definition of done is something we're going to look at a little bit later, but basically it's about what quality do you need in your product increment in order for it to be considered done. Now, this is very simple. This framework is very simple, but there's a few pieces inside of it that we'll look at. But the idea is, think of each sprint as a project, and that's the connection between Scrum and project management. If you're going to do project management, it's actually within each sprint. Sprints also have another unusual characteristic compared to normal projects, which is that they're time-boxed. Each sprint is 1 month or less in duration, and it's extremely strict. Even if the team doesn't get done what it thought it would get done, the time box ends and the sprint ends. Now, just for what it's worth, most software development teams are using 1 or 2 weeks. I recommend 1. And I've seen as short as 1 day long sprints. It really depends on what you're doing, but Scrum says 1 month or less. And that's again related to complexity. If you take longer than a month, actually you're starting to do too much analysis and you're starting to get to a place where you're actually trying to predict too far into the future. So this is related to how far into the future can you truly predict, and the shorter, the better. Now, this process is divided up and has a number of meetings, and I'm going to go through each of these meetings. The first one that starts every sprint is a sprint planning meeting. If you have a 1 month long sprint, sprint planning is time boxed to 8 hours. And it's in proportion. So if you have a 1 week long sprint, sprint planning would be 2 hours. During sprint planning, the Scrum team works together to choose some items from a product backlog items. And these usually represent features, functionality, things that customers would find valuable. In the sprint planning meeting, they figure out some sort of forecast. Maybe it's based on tasks and activities that they are going to execute as a team to deliver those product backlog items. And they create a sprint goal that somehow encapsulates the meaning or the value of all of the work that they're going to do. So the sprint goal might be something like deliver a transaction in our new product. And there might be several product backlog items, there might be dozens or even hundreds of specific tasks, but the goal encapsulates it all, and the goal's purpose is to help the team as it goes through the sprint to make sure that they're on track for the true purpose of what they're doing. After sprint planning, the team starts working, and individual team members will volunteer for tasks. They might work together, they might collaborate. Heck, the whole team might even continue working together. But it is now time to self-organize after sprint planning is completed and to start working on the product increment. After a day passes, the Scrum team gets together for a daily Scrum. Now, I need to be very careful here. Technically, it's the development team members who actually participate in the daily Scrum. It's the people who are actually doing the work. The Scrum Master and the product owner can observe. The Scrum Master often helps to facilitate, but it is the development team members who are doing the work that basically share with each other, what have I done towards the sprint goal? What will I do next to help move us towards the sprint goal? And are there any obstacles or impediments that are preventing me from doing my work effectively in a timely manner or with a high level of quality. And the Scrum team observes and self-organizes after the daily Scrum to continue working. So the daily Scrum is really about just creating transparency. It's not really about problem solving. And it's very short. It's time boxed to 15 minutes. At the end of the sprint, there's actually 2 meetings that are basically back-to-back. The first is the sprint review. And if you have a month-long sprint, this is time boxed to 4 hours. It's proportional, again. So if you have a 1 week-long sprint, this would be 1 hour. The purpose of the sprint review is to get feedback from the marketplace, primarily customers and users. Internal organizational business stakeholders can be there too, but it's about showing off the increment. What has the team done in the sprint, and demonstrating it or reviewing it in some way that allows the team to get that feedback from the marketplace. If you're building software, for example, it's often a live hands-on demo with customers or potential customers. For other products, you might have to do other things, but the idea is that as much as possible, it's direct feedback from the marketplace. The result of a sprint review is updates to the requirements. So we take that feedback and we actually put it into the product backlog, and I'll show that a bit later. Immediately following the sprint review, maybe with a short break, is a sprint retrospective. This is 3 hours per month of sprint length. So in other words, 45 minutes for a 1 week sprint. And this purpose of the sprint retrospective is for the Scrum team to improve the way they work, to look at technology, skill sets, organizational processes, culture, physical environment, pretty much anything. And out of the sprint retrospective come some action items, which should then be incorporated into sprint planning in the next sprint. And then, immediately after the sprint retrospective is finished, you immediately go into sprint planning. Now, of course, many teams align their sprints on week boundaries. So you might start Monday morning with sprint planning and have a sprint retrospective Friday afternoon. So the assumption, though, is that the team isn't doing any work between the finish of one sprint and the start of a next one. There might be a weekend, but no work. The product owners working through this are continually looking at the backlog, and this is the gray bar in the diagram here, the horizontal gray bar. The product owner is managing the product backlog, which is an ordered list of features, functionality, tasks, problems, business problems that need to be solved, and it's organized based on the product owner's estimates of the ROI, the return on investment. So high return on investment items would be at the top and low ones at the bottom. During the sprint, the whole Scrum team is working with the product owner to refine the product backlog. And the reason that the whole team is involved in this is actually, there's several reasons. So one is that it's only the development team members who can tell the product owner what the cost of building those backlog items, the effort needed. So that's an estimation responsibility that the development team members do. The Scrum Master is there to facilitate and make sure it happens, but the whole Scrum team is self-organizing and they need to be aware of what's on the product backlog. Now, Scrum says that this continuous process of backlog refinement is approximately 10% or less of the Scrum team's time. It's important to know, though, that Scrum specifically says that this is not a meeting. Product backlog refinement is not done in a meeting. It's an ongoing process. It's done anytime. So, for example, in the middle of a sprint, maybe a customer, through a support desk, provides some feedback. The product owner hears about this feedback and decides that it represents a new product backlog item. So, in the middle of the sprint, the product owner lets the whole Scrum team know, hey, I've got a new backlog item, we need an estimate, we need to figure out the ROI, and we need to put it on the backlog. That is backlog refinement, and it happens at any time. Now, at the start of the sprint, in sprint planning, the development team pulls product backlog items off the top of the product backlog. So this is why the ordering is important. They are only choosing the highest ROI items. Now, it's important to remember here that the team is choosing these items based on their own capacity. This is self-organizing. There's no one telling the team, you must do 5 items. Instead, the team in sprint planning collaborates with the Scrum Master and the product owner to understand the capacity, and they choose items based on that capacity. Then, during the sprint, they self-organize to convert the product backlog items into an increment of product. Now, I just want to say one word about increment here. In general, we want every sprint to add value. That's what we mean mostly by increment. But increments can also include fixes. Sometimes an increment can include removing things. And the idea is that we just want to always take whatever the marketplace is giving us as feedback and integrate it as quickly as possible into our product. How do we do that? The primary mechanism is the sprint review. In the sprint review, the Scrum team shows the customers, users, and stakeholders the product increment. They get feedback from that review and from the marketplace, and the product owner immediately updates the backlog in that meeting. It's not a separate process. So often that means the product owner is extremely busy taking notes as they hear the feedback from people trying out the product. You can think of it a little bit like a focus group or user acceptance testing. The idea is that it's immediate feedback and it's very concrete.